Welcome back to It's Not Normal, the podcast, episode 18. In this week's episode, we're talking all about insecurity and chronic comparison. Before we get into the episode, I just want to take a quick minute to thank everyone who's been tuning in and following along. If you've been enjoying this podcast as much as we have, please be sure to like this video and subscribe to our channel. We're almost at 1,000 subscribers on YouTube, which is a huge personal milestone. And if you're listening on Spotify, please be sure to leave us a rating. That being said, let's dive into this week's topic. I've experienced insecurity quite a bit throughout my life, mainly surrounding my position in relationships. Whether it was relationships with family members or romantic partners or even just friends. I definitely carried with me a bit of fear that I wasn't wanted or that I wouldn't be included. I think there was also a certain level of disbelief that I carried with me for a while, that, I couldn't believe that these people who I was friends with, whose company I enjoyed, actually reciprocated those feelings, that they wanted me to be around and present also, that they were interested enough in me to consider me a friend. And I know that I'm not the only person who has ever asked myself, do these people really like me? Or why do these people really like me? Who's to say if someone cooler or smarter or prettier comes along, that these people who I really care about won't just completely abandon me, just leave me behind for this objectively better person? And that brings me to the definition of insecurity. Anytime I'm going to talk specifically about a term or a phrase, I like to do a little bit of research just to make sure that my understanding of that term or phrase is actually accurate. Up until this point, my understanding of insecurity was a bit of discomfort, a level of uncertainty, I guess. And that's exactly the first definition that we're going to talk about. It's surrounding this lack of confidence, sort of low self-esteem, feelings of anxiety about yourself or others or an experience, a relationship. And right off the bat, I think a lot of insecurity stems from self-doubt and that lack of self-trust and the resulting confusion. And it makes me think of being a kid and being yelled at by your parent. Maybe you said or did something that upset your parent. Maybe you made a mistake. Or maybe they were just in a bad mood and you were in the wrong place at the wrong time. Regardless of the cause, right? We can all imagine that scenario. You're a kid and your parent is screaming and yelling, maybe saying some really hurtful things to you. It is completely normal in a situation like that to feel upset, maybe even angry. You might start to cry. Instinctually, I think you're going to seek some kind of emotional safety or comfort. And who are you going to seek that from? Your caretaker, more often than not, your parent. But what makes growing up with a narcissistic parent in an environment like that so confusing is that the same person that you are instinctually driven to seek emotional comfort from is the same person who is causing the need for that emotional comfort in the first place. And more often than not, a child seeking that level of emotional intimacy, which again is completely normal, might make an emotionally immature parent extremely uncomfortable. And so they might either completely shut you out and force you to deal with this completely on your own. They might deny their involvement in any of it, again, leaving you on your own. They might gaslight you into believing that whatever it is that you think you experienced wasn't actually all that bad, that you should really just get over it. Or they might expect you to just brush it under the rug without any kind of resolution, without any kind of closure, to just move on when they're ready. If they're ready to move on, then you should be ready to move on too. And that's so confusing because these completely normal emotions that are being brought to the surface by being screamed and yelled at by a really loud adult in your life, by an authority figure, someone that you care about, now you're being told that these emotions are not valid, that either you shouldn't be feeling the way that you are, that you're wrong for feeling the way that you are, or that somehow you're a bad person for experiencing these emotions and needing any kind of emotional comfort. And so the confusion, I think, trickles down and leads to that self-doubt and that lack of self-trust. Because our gut instinct in those moments, maybe before we have the tools to understand and process our emotions and communicate them to another person, we're just experiencing those emotions in the moment, and they're completely normal. But to be told that we're wrong for feeling the way that we feel is so invalidating and confusing. And so moving forward into other experiences in our life, you can carry that uncertainty with you, because now you're feeling like, okay, I can't necessarily rely on my own gut instinct, on my true feelings, because I've been told before that those are wrong and that I'm a bad person for feeling that way. So what am I left to do? Maybe I have to feel out the room. Maybe I have to take on someone else's emotions as my own because maybe they're right and I'm not. And why do we do this? I think so many of us are conditioned over time to suppress our own wants and needs, and instead to take on the emotions or opinions of someone else, more often than not our parent, out of self-preservation, to avoid anger or punishment or argument, feelings of rejection or abandonment. And the only reason that I feel comfortable speaking about these things now and saying things like, it's completely normal to feel emotional, angry, upset when you're being yelled at or punished by a parent, is because now I have perspective. I didn't always understand that physical and emotional needs share a very similar level of importance. I always thought, for the majority of my life growing up, that health and abuse and safety, things of that nature, pertained mainly to the physical. And so being introduced to emotional health and emotional safety, emotional well-being, these were all new concepts for me. And yet when you tie it back to something physical, let's say you're going to go bungee jumping. And so you walk up to the end of this really high cliff and you peek over the edge. Your body is going to have a physical reaction. Maybe your heart rate is going to start to increase. You're going to start to sweat a little bit. You might have this sinking feeling in the pit of your stomach. And what your body is doing, if you're listening closely enough, is telling you, hey, danger, danger. Take a couple steps back. This is not okay. And your body is doing this out of survival, because if your body doesn't send you those impulses, what's to stop you from taking another couple of steps forward? And so you have to listen to your body to survive. You have to trust your instincts. But imagine now you're approaching that same edge of a cliff and you're not strapped in, you're not going bungee jumping, and your body is telling you all of those same things. It's sending you those same signals and you feel prompted to back up, right? Or even to hold on to something. But you've got someone in your ear. Let's say someone you consider to be a professional, a mentor, someone who you believe has your best interest in mind. And they're whispering in your ear, it's okay. There's nothing to be scared about. You shouldn't be feeling anxious. You can take a couple more steps forward. Can you imagine the catastrophic outcome of taking a couple more steps forward? I think that is just so reminiscent of how important it is to listen to your body, to develop that self-trust, and to be in touch with your own instincts. And yet so many of us, I think, are out of touch with our instincts. We don't have that self-trust because we weren't in an environment conducive to developing that. In these moments, our body was sending us emotional signals, things that we should have listened to. And instead, we were conditioned, sort of pressured to suppress those emotions, to completely ignore what our body was trying to tell us, that, hey, maybe you need a little bit of emotional comfort right now. You need that connection to feel safe emotionally. But if our parent was made to feel uncomfortable by that need for emotional intimacy, then it wasn't available for so many of us. And so we weren't really allowed to develop that self-trust, which can be so confusing because we should be listening to our body and what our body's trying to tell us, not only physically, but also emotionally. And yet so many of us grew up in an environment where it was preferable for us to suppress our true emotions, to completely ignore our bodies and the signals that it's trying to send us, and instead to try to anticipate and take on the emotions of someone else. And keeping this idea of instinct in mind, this brings me to the second definition of insecurity. And this is what I'm really excited to talk about in this week's episode, because this definition was one that I hadn't really been exposed to up until this point. It was so plainly put that it really clicked for me. And that is a state of being exposed to danger or a threat, a lack of protection. And when you think about the actual word, insecurity, not secure, it made so much sense, especially with how it relates to being raised by a narcissistic parent. Narcissists and their reactions, if there is one thing that you can bet on, it's their unpredictability. You can go to them with the same topic or question or action, and depending on how they're feeling in that moment, their reaction might be wildly different than what it was the last time. And so not only are you always hyper aware of everything that you are saying and doing, because you never want to be the center of attention in a negative way, you never want to make a mistake, but you're also aware that no matter what you say or do, even if at one time it received a positive reaction, that doesn't necessarily guarantee you any positivity moving forward. And so you're constantly on edge. You're constantly living in a state of fear. I said it once, I'll say it again. When you're dealing with a narcissistic parent, every moment is an eggshell moment. And so when you think about this instinctually, sort of bringing it back to the whole idea of instinct, when you're a kid and you are not yet able to support yourself, the idea of your parent, your caretaker, withdrawing their attention, their affection, their support from you, that is absolutely dangerous. You need them to survive. And so the idea that anything that you say or do can be interpreted in a negative way and then result in something that calls into question your ability to survive is absolutely terrifying. And I think that's why so many of us get stuck in this loop of always trying to be perfect. And that kind of bleeds right into my next point, which is comparison and how insecurity relates to comparison. When you grow up with a narcissistic parent in that kind of environment, not only are you subject to comparison with other people, maybe other kids and their relationship with their parents, what that looks like on the surface. How many of us have been told by a narcissistic parent, oh, I could ask anyone in the world and they would agree with me and not with you. Comparing who you are, what you say, your opinions, your actions to those of other people whose actions or words or opinions are more favorable to your narcissistic parent. But you are also existing in a constant state of comparison between you, who you are, your true self, and this idealized version of you that your narcissistic parent has created in their head. The person that they expect you to be, that they want you to be, that they think you should be. And that is an uphill battle that you will never win. You simply cannot compete with this idealized version of you that your parent has created in their own heads. And yet so many of us still strive to achieve that level of perfection, because what happens when we don't meet or exceed those expectations? That, again, is when that attention and that love and support that we crave instinctually as children is withdrawn. And what that does is absolutely devastating. It leaves you feeling entirely replaceable, like you will never be good enough. Nothing that you ever say or do will ever be good enough. And you alone, as just a person, are not worthy of unconditional love, especially if what you're saying or doing is not in some way serving your parent. You, simply for being here and being you, that's not enough. That's just not going to cut it. And so subconsciously, I think as kids, maybe we start to look elsewhere. We start to look outward at other people who we believe to be experiencing love and ask ourselves, okay, well, what do they have that I don't have? You know, what are they doing that I'm not doing? Why are they better than me? How are they better than me? What makes them more deserving of this than me? And I think that is a part of all of this that's so easy to carry into adulthood and other even healthy relationships in our lives, where we are kind of left feeling like, why do you love me so much? What if someone else comes along who's better than me, right? What if I stop doing the thing that you want me to do, right? Because of course there's got to be something that you want me to do. You're expecting me to serve you in some way or another. And if I stop doing that, then yeah, your love goes with it, right? And so you're constantly comparing yourself to this idealized version of you that was created by your parent. You always feel like you could be doing something better, you should be doing something better, and that you alone, if you stop trying to exceed these expectations even for a minute, just aren't good enough. And you're not worthy of that love. And I think it comes from a really instinctual place, because the withdrawal of that attention and support is so frightening for a child. It feels so dangerous, because now if these people who were supposed to be taking care of you are no longer even speaking to you, what does that mean? And I think when we're young, we don't really have the foresight to understand that, okay, this is an adult in my life and they're upset right now and this is how they're reacting to this, and then they're going to calm down and then there will be dinner on the table, I think it's not so easy for us to connect those dots when we're so young. And the constant comparison kind of feeds right into that insecurity yet again. I think it is such a loop that so many of us get stuck in, where we're insecure about who we are, about the way that we feel, maybe our reactions, our opinions, because for so long we were conditioned to believe that our true feelings, who we are as people, our truest expressions of things, if they didn't serve our parent, right, that we were wrong for them, that they in some way made us a bad person. And so when you feel something internally really strong, like a gut instinct, like I shouldn't get any closer to the edge of that cliff, right? Especially if I'm not strapped in. But then you're told by someone who's older, more experienced than you, someone that you love and trust, that no, it's completely fine if you inch a little bit closer, that you know what, you shouldn't even be feeling nervous. You're kind of a wuss for feeling nervous, for even standing here. You're prompted to silence your inner voice, to completely ignore what your body is trying to tell you. And that is so detrimental to your emotional development, your emotional intelligence, and it can be really difficult to develop those things as an adult. I think the reason that so many of these emotional developmental milestones take place throughout our childhood is because we are without a lot of the stresses and responsibilities that so often accompany adulthood. We don't have to worry about going food shopping and figuring out what to make for dinner. We don't have to wash our own clothes and do 3 loads of laundry a week. We don't have to pay taxes or really understand what it is to get a job and to pay for ourselves, support ourselves financially. That all comes later. All we were supposed to focus on for those early formative years was figuring out how to be a person, how to be ourselves, how to understand our emotions and communicate how we're feeling, big ones, small ones, all of them in between. And our parents are supposed to be the people who guide us along the way, so that when we do reach adulthood and we have to take on all of these other responsibilities, we're already sort of there on the emotional side of things, right? Maybe we feel like we have a good foundation, a good grasp on who we are, like we can trust ourselves and the way that we feel, our gut instincts going into a situation, and we're confident in the people that we are. If I walk into a room and I sense that something is off, right, I want to feel confident enough in my gut instinct to leave and to say, hey, something's kind of off here. Like, I don't really feel like this is a good vibe. So I'm going to remove myself from the situation and I'm going to feel justified in that. I'm not going to walk in there and feel like, okay, maybe something is off, but you know what? Nope, maybe that's just me because I'm doubtful of my own instincts, of my own intuition. I'm going to ignore what my body is trying to tell me. And instead, maybe I'm going to try to pretend like everything is fine, right? Because that's what I was conditioned to do for most of my life. And so that self-doubt, that lack of confidence, I think is just furthered and intensified by the constant comparison, where you're always being compared to someone who, in your parents' eyes, is better than you. Maybe an opinion that's different than yours that would serve them better than your true opinion. Maybe a relationship that objectively they're viewing and interpreting as more positive than the relationship that you have with your parent. And so now you feel another expectation placed upon your shoulders where it's okay, I have to be better than this person now. I have to start acting more like them so that my parent will be happy with me, so that they will continue to support me and provide me their attention and affection. And so when do you let these things go? I think for so many of us, when we finally make the decision or have the ability to remove ourselves from those relationships or that environment, we're into our adult years, maybe our late teens, our early 20s. And so you're kind of multitasking. You feel like you're always juggling between life and your life responsibilities and catching up on a lot of these really important developmental milestones that we missed out on as kids. And you're doing it all without the reassurance or guidance of someone who has a little bit more experience than you, someone who genuinely wants the best for you and will always be there to support you no matter what and to offer up whatever helpful advice they might have. And so it can be so hard to develop that self-trust, to learn how to follow your gut, to sort of reintroduce yourself to your instincts, because for so long you were so out of touch with them, and to allow yourself to listen to your body when it's trying to tell you something, whether it's physical or emotional, all the while trying to stop yourself from comparing yourself to everyone around you. Because in these situations, it can feel like you are miles and miles and miles behind your peers, because maybe they grew up with emotionally mature parents. Maybe they're not juggling quite as much because they already have a good sense of self. They're confident in their decisions. They don't feel like they have to serve someone, offer something up to someone to receive any kind of love or affection. And so maybe you feel like I shouldn't be taking this long. I shouldn't feel this way. I should be further along. I shouldn't have an issue with this. But it's completely normal, especially when you grow up in a toxic environment like that. And I cannot stress to you how important it is to be patient with yourself, because it will happen over time. You will grow. You will reintroduce yourself to your instincts. You will start to develop that confidence. And once again, trust in your own decisions and your own intuition. You're more in tune with what's going on internally. And throughout that process, I think that will allow you to let go of some of that comparison. I think it's so easy for us to fall victim to comparison when we are not happy or confident in who we are, when we don't have a strong sense of self and we don't love ourselves. We're not proud maybe of who we are, but we have to realize that a lot of those negative feelings about ourselves probably came from other people and earlier life experiences that we had. Our self-image doesn't have to be dictated by anyone other than ourselves. And so once you learn how to trust yourself again and everything starts to fall back into a bit of a groove, you start to develop that identity and you start to understand that you yourself are worthy of anything that you put yourself out there for. You are worthy of love and connection and support and empathy and understanding because you say so and because you give those things to yourself. And I think when you're happy with who you are, which comes a lot from developing self-trust and confidence, then it doesn't matter whatever the external circumstances are. It doesn't matter what anyone else says or does. If you are happy with yourself and love yourself, I think it will be exponentially easier for other people to be happy with you and to love you all the same, because you are no longer relying on those external sources of validation to dictate how you feel about yourself or your life. And that is a really wonderful thing. It takes a lot of time, but it is so worth it. The peace that comes along with it is so worth it. And that's why I think healing is such a wonderful thing. The people who make a conscious decision to set out on a healing journey, I am so proud of every single one of them. I am in awe because I understand how difficult it is. It is a constant job. It's not something that, you clock in at 9 a.m. and then you clock out at 5 and you're done for the day. It's something that sort of infiltrates every thought and every experience. But if you look at it through the right lens with sort of a positive mindset behind it all, then it can be really beneficial. Your growth can be constant and exponential. And when you do that, when you show up for yourself and then you meet your own expectations, that's when you start to feel really proud. And that's when you start to develop that self-love and that self-trust, because it's like, hey, I set out to do this thing and I did it and it feels really good. And I know that this is right for me and I'm proud of myself for making that decision. So shout out to every single person who is listening to this podcast, who has listened to any kind of mental health or self-help podcast, who has made any bit of an effort to start to heal. I applaud you, I see you, and I am with you. And with that, I think I'm going to wrap up this week's episode. So thank you so much to everyone who tuned in. This was a lot of fun, and I'm really excited to be back next week with another episode of It's Not Normal, the podcast. Bye.